Usually how Marxists will critique the cultural Marxist argument is that, well, they get Marxism wrong, or they complain that they won't debate them, or they won't debate people who can actually debate them. And what I want to focus on is, for what my grandma used to say, when you point the finger, remember there's three fingers pointing back at you, and to look at what responsibility do Marxists play in the rise of what is being called cultural Marxism. So is there anything you want to say before we get into a quick primer on cultural Marxism, and then get into the meat of the matter about what role do Marxists play in this?
Well, I'll just briefly prefigure what I'm going to say in the main body of my comments by saying that the reason why Peterson, Rufo, Lindsay, Ben Shapiro, various other chancers on the internet are able to do this is because Western Marxism in particular gave them an open goal to do so. So what they are able to do, what they are able to portray Marxism as, this sort of cartoonish, clownish, threatening thing, is what Western Marxism opened the door to in many respects.
So when I'm talking to Marxists, I totally understand why their heads explode, because they do bastardize and present a caricature that's self-serving. But of course, they're involved in an ideological battle more than anything else, I would say, even though they might really want to, quote unquote, save the university. And I'm all for saving the university from postmodernism and and the excesses of that. However, my inconvenient questions or disavowed truths, to use a fancy word, would be, did Marxists enable rather than direct the emergence of cultural Marxism, or in what ways? This kind of goes back to what you said about Western Marxism. The proponents of French theory or postmodernism carry out a palace or silent revolution in critical theory. Again, critical theory became what Marxism was kind of a pseudonym for Marxism. I think beginning with the Frankfurt School, it became kind of like critical theory, wink, wink, we mean Marxism. And then all of a sudden now it means, a variety of other things. So of course the question becomes, why was it so easy to do that? Or it seems looking back that it was easy to do that. And also, are Marxists avoiding ruthless critique of how and why they have been so compromised or overshadowed by these So these are three questions that I have, and I don't necessarily have answers for, but I think they're important questions, or at least the beginnings of important questions to get to the bottom of how we got here.
The first question, which is about Marxists enabling the emergence of cultural Marxism, there's two distinctions to be made here. Cultural Marxism has been talked about by reactionaries of various kinds since the early 20th century. Various reactionaries in Europe were complaining about it, and they do use some of the same arguments that the likes of Peterson, Rufo, and Lindsay use now. If you read Mein Kampf, which I wouldn't recommend necessarily, but I did, it's full of this kind of stuff about how Judeo-Bolshevism, the usual complaint from Adolf, was infiltrating everything and hollowing everything out, which is a very familiar complaint from the extremely online reactionaries. So that's an old thing that has been brought back. Not everybody who talks about cultural Marxism is a fascist of some description, or is aping the failed Austrian watercolor artist, as I refer to him as. But that is a source of some of this. In terms of Marxism and its responsibility for cultural Marxism, let's be clear. Cultural Marxism, the Frankfurt School, from whence it springs, is the better way to refer to it would be Western Marxism, because that's essentially what Western Marxism has become, is like a sort of parody of Marxism that is critiqued and screamed about by Peterson, Lindsay, Rufo, many, many others. And that starts really with the Frankfurt School, but it wasn't that the Frankfurt School meant that was code for Marxism. It was code specifically for anti-communist Marxism, and was from the very beginning. From the very beginning, Adorno, Horkheimer, and the others who founded the Frankfurt Institute for Social Research, they were specifically anti-Soviet. They were specifically anti-communist. They were anti the German Communist Party. And this starts in the late 1920s, when the German Communist Party was a serious big deal. Like became the third and fourth biggest party in Germany in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So it emerges as a form of Marxism which specifically despises the Soviet Union and is anti the Soviet Union. And it's run by people who are rabidly anti-working class. Adorno, Horkheimer, the rest of them, rabidly anti-working class, incredibly snobbish, incredibly elitist in their points of view. To them, Marxism was a neat parlor trick, something that would enable them to do something else. Which is why to them, they are guilty of divorcing Marxism from class struggle. And if you divorce Marxism from class struggle, you cease to do Marxism. And this is why, of course, they were brought to the attention of both Adorno, Horkheimer, the Herbert Marcuse later on, came to the attention of the CIA and MI6 because they were looking for, as Gabriel Rockhill and other scholars have pointed out, they were looking for, as what Rockhill calls the compatible left. They were looking for a left that would be, on the surface, use a lot of radical words, but in the form. So they had the form of radicalism. The content, though, was purely anti-communist and anti-worker. And that's what the Frankfurt School were and remained. And that is why, when you talk about cultural Marxism, that's the truth of that descriptor is contained within the Frankfurt School. And so that's why it flows into things like replacing class analysis with analysis of what the Frankfurt School psychoanalyst Erich Fromm called how the fear of freedom, how fascism arose because people just didn't want to be free. They weren't prepared to face the full realities of their choices, so they hid behind authoritarianism. It's why Marcuse openly said in '67, I think, with One Dimensional Man, that the working class in the United States was no longer the revolutionary subject. The revolutionary subject was now the urban racial minorities, minority sexualities, those who were excluded from the sort of New Deal era American society. So he specifically decentered the working class from his so-called Marxism, just as earlier on Adorno and Horkheimer had basically divorced Marxism from, or tried to divorce it from, any concept of class struggle. And this is why, of course, they are, sponsored by the CIA, MI6, and various foundations to go around the world giving these long-winded lectures, which essentially lead people down a garden path to absolutely nowhere. Because if you take out the class struggle element of Marxism, first of all, it's no longer Marxism, and you add in all these different elements, saying, well, we should focus on the homeless are now the radical subjects. It's the racial minorities who are the revolutionary subjects. It's the minority sexualities who are the revolutionary subjects. You can see, I mean, this borders back on the discussion we were having about how the left went in for transgenderism. You can see why the left went in for transgenderism. They'd found another revolutionary subject. They've been trying to do that.
To be disappointed by.
Yeah, well, they've been trying to do that.
There's
since
the rise and fall. They're still in love now, but it's starting. The shine is leaving the diamond.
Yeah, they'll go on to something else now. But this is the point. Like, so there's elements of in what the anti-communists who say that cultural Marxism is hollowing out the West. They have elements of truth in what they say, and the elements of truth revolve around the Frankfurt School. They also revolve around Derrida, Foucault, Deleuze, and others, who started off, a lot of them did, in the old French Communist Party back in the 1950s. Foucault was a member. I believe Derrida was a member for a while. A lot of them, these intellectuals, were all part of the Communist Party of France in the immediate period after World War II into the 50s. Most of them left by the early 60s, early to mid 60s. Foucault became a specific anti-communist. And again, look at Foucault's work. What is he focusing on? Prisons, history of insanity,
Sex,
history of sexuality, for
knowledge, of course. Yeah.
for reasons that we won't get into now. Why that some of those were his fascinations.
Was he the first autoethnographer?
Yes, basically. But what you do then is like you replace Marxism Leninism is a comprehensive, or should be a comprehensive, worldview. So what Foucault does is he breaks it down into systems of oppression, individualized systems of oppression. So like the prison is a system of oppression, the asylum is a system of oppression, like the oppression of minority sexualities is another system. Whereas, and then you take out the class struggle bit entirely, and you end up doing crazy things like, declaring that the whole class struggle is finished, and we must look elsewhere for any radical breakthroughs. Briefly endorsing the Iranian Revolution until he found out what it actually was. Then he was a whole lot less keen on it. But what they all did was they all took a pro-imperialist turn, which is what Rufo and Peterson will never talk about. So like Foucault was to a certain extent, Derrida certainly was. Derrida, by the end of his life in Spectres of Marx, is openly saying, I mean, first of all, that's a gibberish book. I mean, I remember reading it a few years ago, and it's like he's talking about how to reclaim Marx, but he makes it clear that he has nothing to do with Marxism. The Marxists now should all support the US-led bombing of Bosnia. Because that's where radicalism lies. It's basically he became just like Christopher Hitchens, just more wordy and pretentious. Marxism of Derrida, of course, follows on from. I mean, the reason why this grows is in part due to the fact that they were all part of this Communist Party, which did fail. The French Communist Party did abominably fail. They failed with regard to Algeria in the 50s, where they took a pro-imperialist position for a long time. It's the reason why, Sartre, to give him credit where some credit is due, did oppose that, but Sartre was also later a Zionist, so there you go. But the French Communist Party collapsed into just being another social democratic party, which is the reason why they opposed the worker uprising of 1968, which is what the real story of 1968 was. Yes, there was that student element. Then you have this gigantic strike wave, which tries to take over the running of factories, and the French Communist Party deliberately sabotages it and essentially sides with de Gaulle, because they wanted to preserve what they regarded as the positive thing, which was the social democratic compromises of the post-1945 French governments. We don't have time to get into all the whys and wherefores now, but that is what happened to them. And so where you have these failures in France, same failure in Italy, which turns ultimately to Euro-communism, which of course produces people like Negri, if you're familiar with him, Tony Negri, who went on to write the book Empire.
Yeah, Hart Negri,
associated with the Red Brigade terrorist organization earlier on in his career. So you have all of these Western communist parties be either repressed or fail. And so therefore the intellectual layer that came out of them already have a distorted view of Marxism. And so they are then offered a profitable career path out of communism, out of the communist parties, into Western academia, to produce this sort of the endless repeat cycle of deconstruction, or the various analyses of Foucault. And that's the path that they all took. All is part of like the stew, the foul brew that becomes like the what is Western Marxism today, which is inflected by all of this, and academia, which is soaked in all of this. So when James Lindsay says academia is soaked in all of this, he's not wrong. He's just wrong about where it comes from, because ultimately a lot of these people support some of the same things that James Lindsay does. But talk about your second point, like the critical theory. The coup that they carried out was against Marxism-Leninism. They were part of the vanguard attempt. They were in the intellectual vanguard of anti-communist academic Marxism. So yes, their coup was really against Marxism-Leninism, and they're taking ownership of Western Marxism was their success that the ruling class was very happy to see. And now, in terms of avoiding ruthless critique, I would say that what needs to be done with Western Marxism, and some are doing this now in the West. Rockhill's doing it. Even like I'm trying to do it in a smaller way. Is that this entire development since the beginnings of the Frankfurt School needs to be systematically critiqued and then rejected, because this is where this is like fruit from the poisoned tree. As soon as like the Frankfurt School rejected class struggle, rejected the idea that the working class could become the ruling class because they hated the working class, and took class struggle out of Marxism and just turned it into endless interpretations of various cultural phenomena, which is what it is with Adorno, what it is with ultimately what it is with Marcuse as well, and which just leads to defeatism, pessimism, and you going down an ideological cul-de-sac. Well, that all needs to go. Basically, that all needs to be properly critiqued and then discarded, because it was like a long-term deviation which did give rise to all this bizarre shit that you've seen.